in the lead up to Life of Pause, you took more time. I mean, how important was it for this record to be an accurate statement of where you are as a musician and as a songwriter?
I mean, it was pretty important, but I think it's always important. I mean, I think that, whatever it is that you are releasing should hopefully be like a pretty honest portrait of where you are. I mean, for me, that can mean just like where I'm at in my life, just personally, but also musically, what I'm hoping to do, and or just what I'm interested in, because of course, like anybody else, my tastes change constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I think that was something that I was conscious of with this record, and there was so much time in between Life of Pause and Nocturne, which wasn't necessarily intentional. It just kind of happened, and it wasn't. I feel like so often you hear someone talking about a record and like, oh, there's 4 years in between this record or however many years, and it sort of is misleading, because it might make people think that I've like been working on this record for ages, which really it wasn't the case. It was just, I don't know. It's hard sometimes to figure out exactly what it is that you want to do, like what it is that you hope to accomplish musically.
With this record, I mean, you weren't thinking about genre too much. Do you feel that's part of the reason that it's, you personally feel it's more varied and more well-rounded because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more representative of what I'm interested in personally. I think it's hard when you make a certain kind of record the first time around, and especially with that record, Gemini, being the first one that I made. And I was young. I mean, I was like 21 when I wrote that record, so I was very much, I had this idea of what I wanted to do and did it. But even then, that was only one aspect of what I was interested in musically. And I think I just kind of jumped at it. I think there was a part of me, maybe because I was younger, that felt like, okay, you have to just pick something and like that's going to be your thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of record that I made, like I focused in heavily on this one, one area of music. The influences that affected that record were pretty specific. And so to then go from that and build an audience and then try and like figure out how do I like then allow myself to pull from all of these other things that I do care about that people might not know about. So yeah, it's tricky, but I think that is why, I kind of view this record as the most successful personally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's most artists will probably say that about whatever it is that's newest because it's the closest to them at that point in time. But I think I'll always be able to look back on this record and like feel okay about what I did. You know what I mean? Like I'll feel happy about the choices that I made.
In terms of lyrics, something that's mentioned often is that, lyrics are, you mentioned, they're quite complicated for you. You gravitate more towards the compositions and the sounds being formed. Is that part of the reason why you kind of allow for your lyrics to kind of be cloaked in some kind of mystery and, you kind of have them intentionally vague? Is that something that you gravitate towards?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's much more of a poetic quality to my lyrics than there is any sort of storytelling. I mean, like there are stories that get weaved into my songs, but they're largely just like little snapshots of things from my life that are then filtered through the way I write lyrics, which I don't know, I mean, like really they're vague to an extent, like they're vague in that they can be interpreted a bit differently. It might sound like I'm not really talking about anything at all, but then if, you could probably ask me about particular lines, I could say, oh, that's like a reference to this dream I had, or that's a reference to this conversation I had with somebody, or a reference to, whatever, a relationship that I had and like a moment in that relationship. So it's just it's always like a combination of a lot of things. And I think because of that, they do sometimes come across as vague, but but it is intentional.
TV Queen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with this track, I mean, what again? There's like, you know, the range within is so impressive. What part would you say you focused on most to get this track to be so refined and so concise?
I mean, that was one of the earlier tracks that I wrote for the record, and in my mind, it kind of has one of the strongest ties back to the older material. Just in that, you know, when I wrote it, I felt like, okay, this is a fairly straightforward kind of like new wave inspired track. You know, it felt like it had more in common with Nocturne than some of the other songs. But at the same time, you know, like I was always looking for a new angle. I was always looking for just little details to add into these songs that would kind of, at the very least, like keep my interest. So, you know, I don't know. That song was kind of tricky too, just because we ended up recording several different drum takes on it and trying out different drum beats over that song, and every time it just didn't quite feel right. So we ended up kind of simplifying everything a lot. So that's why it's a pretty sort of like I don't know how to describe it, but it's pretty straightforward song.
Yeah.
You know, in some ways.
And tell me about, I mean, vocal harmonies were kind of identified as a creative spark for this record. I mean, how does that come into play?
I feel like I had this moment where I kind of realized how important vocal melody or vocal harmonies could be, because there was very few vocal harmonies on my earlier music. I mean, like I can't really even think of any vocal harmonies on Gemini off the top of my head, but I don't know, just I was playing around writing some of these songs, and like TV Queen being a good example of writing that chorus. And, you know, I was like, I like the chorus right off the bat, you know, because it has sort of like a weird chord change that's a bit unexpected. And so I knew that I liked the chorus, but just, and then I had added this vocal harmony, and it seemed to just make the chorus stand out more than it did before. So it's just a really subtle effect, and like it's, I don't know, it's just something that I hadn't really done that much. And I mean, there's another song, Adore, that's on the record that has a lot of vocal harmonies. I don't know, I mean, part of it is just sort of like allowing myself to toy around with classic, my idea of like classic songwriting more so than I did in the past.
Tell us more about, understand you like to listen to Blue Nile every day.
Yeah, I love Blue Nile. I don't know, my Twitter is a joke. Twitter is a funny thing, right? Because it's, I don't know, I every once in a while I'll remember that I have one. I'm like, oh, like I guess you can say stuff on this thing. Like usually I'm just like using it to look at news or whatever, and then I'll forget about it for like a month.
But I have got a couple of interesting tweets that you put up, and
yeah, usually they're all music related. It's just
yeah.
like I'll just be listening to something and be like, God, I love this, and then I'll just be like,
yeah, well, here's one. It is musical related. I mean, my place in my life where I'd much rather listen to Hall & Oates than Joy Division.
Yeah.
What led to that one?
I was listening to Hall & Oates. I was listening to Abandoned Luncheonette, and I was just thinking to myself, it's like, God, I just love Hall & Oates, and then I was just kind of thinking about fans that I have that, you know, like are more tuned in with, you know, older music that I made, and just I don't know, there's a little bit of a funny disconnect. So I don't know, I guess it was just a bit cheeky.
And here's one. I mean, you know, why does everyone think I'm insane when I talk about Microsoft Bob?
Yeah, Microsoft Bob was this very early Microsoft operating system that I had on the very first family computer that we bought, that my parents bought. Yeah. I must have been, I don't know, like 9 or 10 or something. But it's like a graphic oriented operating system where instead of it being like a desktop where you got all your files, you like virtually walk through different rooms in your house. It's really bizarre, but no one ever knows what I'm talking about whenever I mention it.